Hello, everyone. Welcome to the PCA webinar session. We're doing today's topic on cigar compliance, and we're honored to have a special guest with us, Peter Quinter, who is the chair of the U.S. Customs and International Trade Law Group at Gunster. I'll go a little bit into Peter's background, but I do want to say that Peter is a cigar enthusiast. We actually met at Pro Cigar in the Dominican Republic. And we're excited to have him at the PCA Trade Show 2022 coming up next week in Las Vegas. So if you have a question today, feel free to submit it in the chat box, and Peter will address those. But if you would like to talk to him one-on-one or at the trade show, he will be available to answer some questions as a follow-up to this session. Peter is globally ranked U.S. Customs and International Trade law counselor and advocate. He represents individuals and companies associated with international trade, transportation, including litigation before federal courts across Florida and before the U.S. Court of International Trade in New York. He is a Florida Bar Certified International Law Attorney. Moreover, he advises on legal issues involving licensing, investigations, and penalties issued by the U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, the U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Asset Controls, and the U.S. Department of State's Directorate of Defense Trade Control. He advised clients on reducing penalties by the FAA for hazardous materials or dangerous goods transported by air. Peter, prior to private practice, Peter served as legal counsel at the Southeast Regional Headquarters of the U.S. Customs Service in Miami, Florida. His responsibilities included providing legal advice and representation to management of customs on all matters involving the administration and enforcement, advised on virtually all U.S. customs activities undertaken, including commercial operations, fines, penalties, forfeitures, and regulatory audit personnel. Prior to joining Gunster, Peter was a partner in a major commercial law firm and head of its U.S. Customs and International Trade practice. I have a wealth of experience in this area, and I speak for the Premium Cigar Association. We're thankful to have you on this webinar, Peter, and also gain some insights into what's going on today.
I appreciate that very much, Josh, and I appreciate the PCA, Premium Cigar Association, for inviting me to have this webinar today. We're going to go for about an hour. There's going to be a lot of information included in this for both manufacturers and importers of cigars. There is a chat box, as was mentioned, so I hope that people will use the chat box to ask questions during this webinar. If there's something confidential, you don't even want to think about asking during the chat, during this hour webinar, you have my contact information here on the home page, and you can always contact me confidentially, separate from this webinar. So I can't see the chat box now. So let's move forward. So as Josh mentioned, I'm a U.S. Customs and International Trade lawyer. I'm definitely a cigar aficionado, and I was pleased to be in this business probably for the last 30 years since graduating law school, when I first started out at U.S. Customs regulating the import-export community. So, as you know, I will be there in just a few weeks at the Venetian Hotel, enjoying some cigars, some alcoholic beverages, refreshments, and the enjoyment of being in Las Vegas. There's some pictures of me enjoying a cigar. You got your tobacco leaf. Josh and I were both at this Pro Cigar Festival in Santiago, Dominican Republic, a few weeks ago. Months ago, I guess now. Now, I mentioned questions. There's no such thing as a bad question or a foolish question. Everybody should ask questions during the webinar in the chat room. Feel free to do so. I'm not going to repeat your name or your company. So this is an open conversation and an opportunity for you to ask questions for free to an expert in this field. So I really encourage you to do so. And I will request that you do so now rather than wait to the end, because by an hour from now, you'll forget your question was, and we'll be too busy trying to wrap up for the rest of the hour. So please ask your questions. Okay, let's get serious, because the government is very serious. So I deal with U.S. Customs and Border Protection every day. I deal with, I deal with TTB, Tax and Trade Bureau, every single day when it comes to tobacco and cigar importers particularly. So those two agencies I'm very familiar with. And because I'm so familiar with it, I can tell you I've done everything from applying for permits to audits, to investigations, criminal and civil, to just about to disputes between suppliers and manufacturers and distributors and retailers, et cetera. But I also want to make sure that everybody knows how serious the government pursues companies that are involved in this regulated industry of tobacco and especially cigars. This is the law, Title 26, United States Code 5762, criminal penalties. For all kinds of violations, there's a minimum infraction penalty of 1 year in jail or $1,000 fine or both. That's the minimum. So obviously you want to be able to avoid this kind of situation. And that means following the rules, which means you have to know the rules in the first place. The most common problem, of course, is companies that don't declare the proper value of the cigar product to U.S. Customs Border Protection in order to pay less taxes or internal revenue taxes or excise taxes to U.S. Customs as required. It happens all the time, every day. TTB knows it, CBP knows it, and it's something that has been pursued aggressively by the federal law enforcement authorities, especially in South Florida. Obviously, as many of you know, most of the cigars that come into the United States are coming in through Florida, and specifically Miami. So that's where the prosecutions tend to take place. That's where the audits tend to take place. That's where the trade community exists. So let's look at an example just a few months ago. Here you have an individual, a California tobacco company, importing through Miami, not paying the proper amount of the excise tax to U.S. Customs. And what happened? The company was charged with the crime. The owner of the company, in this case, the president of the company, was charged with the crime, ended up being convicted and spending some time behind bars. It's really unfortunate. It's a standard thing. The underreporting of the federal tobacco excise tax on the imported cigars happens time and time again. And this is just an example. So I wanted to make sure that people are aware of it. Here's another example, also in Miami. Here's a gentleman out of New York who's importing the products through Miami. And this is classic. In an effort to defraud the U.S. Customs of excise taxes due on the imported cigars, the individual created false and fraudulent documents, including Customs 7501, that's the entry summary forms, which misrepresented the quantities of the large cigars imported to the U.S. and the amount of the federal excise tax to be paid on those imported cigars. This is a classic situation, and it's really unfortunate. What's even more unfortunate when you get into the details of it, who is Mr. Alberto Rodriguez? He was a customs broker. He's not even the importer or the manufacturer of the cigars. He's the customs broker that's filing the entry documents on behalf of the importer with U.S. Customs Border Protection, declaring what's being imported, the value of what's being imported, the quantity of what's being imported, and he conspired with the importer to falsify documents to U.S. Customs. And of course, they were caught, and both the importer and the customs broker were convicted and sentenced. Most of you, I hope, have never seen a criminal complaint. This is the copy of the criminal complaint that was used against the importer. Notice this is the individual owner of the import company who was charged, not just the company. The whole concept of you think if it's just a company that's the importer, and if there's any wrongdoing, only the company pays, may be true in a civil case. But when it's a criminal case, the individual officers or shareholders of the company are charged typically individually. So it's very unfortunate, but it happens all the time. And you'll see in the criminal charge complaint summary, it says, willfully attempt to evade or defeat any tax, namely the federal tobacco excise tax on large cigars. This is another situation. All right, here's the actual relevant sections of that complaint. You all probably know paragraph 11, federal tobacco excise tax on imported large cigars is based on a statutory mandated percentage of the price of the cigars. We're going to get to that later. And it says here, at the time of these events, the federal tobacco excise tax rate for large cigars was 52.75% on the first sale price, which we'll talk about later. And then paragraph 12, proper and truthful record keeping was required. Obviously, they didn't do that. And you'll see here, paragraph 36, TTB shared its findings with the IRS, CI, Criminal Investigation Division. That's exactly how it always happens. When a declaration is made of the imported cigars to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, either the importer does it itself or through a customs broker, Customs is the first one that receives the documentation. Since it's cigars, they typically refer the case, if there's anything suspicious, to TTB directly. TTB will look at it. Maybe they'll have their own special agent look at it. Maybe they'll have an auditor look at it. Maybe just an analyst will look at it. If there's a suspicion of any criminal activity, often the TTB will also refer the case for investigation to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. And that's when they get into whether or not the proper amount of excise tax was paid and income tax was paid. So it's a very unfortunate situation, but it happens all the time, something we do all the time. So in June 2016, IRS agents interviewed a licensed customs broker who was responsible for overseeing the entry into the United States of large cigars. And that's the way it happened. So here's another situation. Tobacco importer, the same gentleman, Mr. Bryant Jr., Palmetto Bay, Florida, sentenced to 48 months imprisonment. So that's 4 years he's going to spend behind bars for fraudulently evading $13 million in federal excise taxes. Maybe it was worth it to him, but in the end, he was ordered to pay that $13 million back, and he's spending time in jail, and he's out of business. So this is just background. This is what we're going to talk about is no joke. All right, a lot of people enjoy a cigar, but they sometimes forget that it's regulated as much as it is, and they don't know how TTB is structured. TTB is actually a really small federal agency in the US government. So it's only a few hundred people. There's basically two locations, Washington, DC, and the National Revenue Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. The administrator is Mary Ryan. Deputy administrator now is David Wolf. For our purposes, almost everything you're going to end up doing with TTB falls under the assistant administrator for field operations, who's Carrie May. And there's a few different divisions that I want to get into, which are the most important parts of TTB that you probably, or your agents, or your customs broker or lawyers, will have some contact with. One is the tax audit division. Now, the tax audit division is about 20 auditors located in different places around the country, and they will go to your facility. They didn't for the last couple of years, but typically now, they will send you an audit letter saying, dear US company, you have been selected for an audit. Please send us a certain number of records for a certain period of time. And then the auditor will show up, meet with you. They want to meet with the top executives. They want to interview the top executives. They want to see what kind of internal controls you have of those top executives. You should, my recommendation is you always have your lawyer there with you, if you're a TTB lawyer. You should always have your customs broker there with you. And the auditor will also want to walk around the facility, whether it's an office or warehouse where you store your cigars. That's what they want to see. Then they want to see all the records. So that's why I say here, a full scope audit includes examination of many areas of a taxpayer's records, including general ledgers, inventory and production systems, and automated data processing. You should have all of your records. We're going to focus on this time and time again about record keeping. It's the easiest way for the government to pursue you for some sort of misdeclaration or fraud. Okay, Trade Investigations Division. Auditors are not special agents. They don't have arrest power. The Trade Investigations Division, those are criminal investigators. They have arrest power. So they're the ones who actually present the case to the federal prosecutor, the U.S. Attorney's Office, in the location where the company is placed, if necessary. So they do all the different things whenever there's an audit that reveals serious discrepancies, including the failure to pay or improper payment of excise taxes. So they are the same agents, by the way, who do whether it's tobacco of any kind, including cigars, and alcoholic beverages. Okay, so all the bad news out of the way, here's the good news. This is a classic cover letter to a TTB permit for an importer or manufacturer who has been provided a license. The first sentence says, your application for a permit to import tobacco products has been approved. That's what you want. You'll see the emphasis, if you read through here, that the focus of TTB is really record keeping. So look what they say here in even the second sentence. You must keep these approved documents at your permit premises and readily available for examination by TTB officials. And it says later on in the third paragraph, as an importer of tobacco products, you must keep records and submit reports of the physical receipt and disposition of tobacco products. It identifies the regulation. We're going to get into all that later. Again, I repeat this because it's so critical. I see it over and over again by manufacturers and importers of tobacco products that just don't keep records until it's demanded by the TTB officials, and they have to scramble to create the records that may be more than that up to 3 years old. All right, so let's look what this is a standard letter, so I'm not amending it in any way. In bold, it says, please note that this permit will expire 5 years from the effective date shown on the permit. So every 5 years, every manufacturer and importer has to reapply for a permit from TTB. And that's usually when TTB gets you. That's usually when they look at your record for the past 5 years and find there's something wrong. So then you end up paying a penalty to TTB and risking renewal of your permit. And that's why you get those frantic phone calls. But in the end, we end up resolving it. So, okay, so these are some standard forms for anybody who's going to apply for any kind of a permit with the TTB. Power of attorney form. In order for me or any other lawyer to represent the company and apply for the permit, we have to be specifically appointed by the company. So this is the TTB form. Now, this is a paper form. Everything nowadays is done online. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But it's very easy to complete this form. The owner or officer of the company fills out the information, designates the name of the individual. That would be, let's say here, number 6, name, telephone number, and email address of the appointed attorney. So Peter Quinter at Gunster, etc. And typically, if it's an LLC, the CEO or a managing member will sign it with the title and the date. Whether or not you have a seal for the company doesn't matter. And here's the easy part. Either you go to a notary, your law firm, your real estate company, a bank, and have that notarized in front of your signature in front of the official, or you get 2 friends of yours who are not related to you, not employed by you, to be witnesses. They just sign their name, put their date, that they're observing the signature of your signature, and you submit this online. It's really easy. Okay, this is the law, Title 26 U.S. Code, Section 5712, how to apply for a permit. Now we're going to go through a few different things here. Here's a few different sections. One has to talk about the premises in which the proposed conduct of business. You don't need a warehouse, but if you have a warehouse, at some point TTB and or CBP will want to visit it. So it has to be a secure warehouse and certain sizes and certain other requirements. Now look at number 3, because this is talking about the people involved. If you're a corporate officer, if you're an import manager of the company, if you're a shareholder of the company, your information will eventually be shared with TTB. And anything that we're going to talk about in A, B, and C will disqualify the applicant from consideration of getting an import permit from TTB. You lack your business experience. Your financial standing is reviewed. Yes, that could even mean your credit rating. If you filed a bankruptcy, that's a bad thing. Trade connections or by reason of previous or current legal proceedings involving a felony or any other provision of federal law. All of those things are potentially disqualifying, but it doesn't automatically require that it be disqualified. Everything can be explained. B, if you've been convicted of a felony violation involving federal or state law involving tobacco products, that's very difficult to overcome. I did have a gentleman who was convicted of DUI, and we were able to get him the permit anyway. So just because you have a criminal background, maybe you've been divorced, maybe there's a really negative situation related to that divorce in which an owner or officer of a company is involved, you can overcome that. But C, if in the application you fail to disclose any material information required or make any material false statements in the application, and TTB discovers that as part of their background investigation, that's negative. That will be difficult to overcome. So, for example, if you've gone through a divorce, if you file bankruptcy, if you have a criminal conviction of any kind, disclose it in the application and explain it. Because in my experience, I've been doing this 30 years, once TTB knows of it and you explain it reasonably, they will consider it, but they will not disqualify you. So if you don't disclose it and they discover it later, that looks really bad to you. Okay, separate from the power of attorney form, there's some corporate documents that you'll have to file with TTB. The articles of incorporation or articles of organization, the sign in the lower section here, the TTB form 5100.1, signing authority. There's only one person who should be able to have proper signing authority with TTB. So you have to designate who in your company is that person. Okay. If for some reason TTB determines that your application is not going to be approved, they will send you a letter saying we are considering not approving your application for the following reasons. And then you can ask for a hearing before the investigations division, district director for TTB, and eventually that goes to Washington, D.C. for review and decision. Okay. All right, so let's go to the personnel questionnaire. So if you're an owner of the company, if you're an officer of the company, you're going to submit a personnel questionnaire to TTB. They will know about you, your information of where you live, your social security number, the company's tax identification number, the address of the company. All of this information will be input into the online system through this questionnaire. You can see here, number 11, your date of birth. Number 10, your place of birth. Whether it's inside the United States or not is fine. And by the way, you can apply for a permit even if you're not a U.S. citizen or a U.S. citizen not residing in the United States. A lot of people don't realize that. They think you have to be a U.S. citizen living in the United States to apply for a permit, and you don't. I represented people from all over the world in this situation. Okay, we talked a little bit about the criminal history before. Here's where it comes down. Here's the specific questions. Have you ever been summoned for, arrested for, or charged with any violation of federal state law? So notice that says summoned for, arrested for, not just charged. A lot of people think they don't have to disclose anything to the government unless they're actually convicted of a crime. No, this question talks about even if you've been charged with a crime. Suppose you were arrested and not charged, you still have to tell the government. Don't hide anything from the government. It can all be explained later on. So again, have you been summoned for, arrested for, or charged with a misdemeanor? So a lot of people think you only have to disclose a felony. No, in the application, TTB wants to know that the people who are getting permits to operate alcoholic beverages or tobacco products, especially cigars, are people who they think will not defraud the government. So be upfront, tell the government what they're asking, answer what they're asking. If you need to explain it, talk to your lawyer, they'll find a way. I've found a way many times. So, okay, then if you did say yes to any of those questions above, you have to explain it, usually in a separate piece of paper. All right, separate from the criminal background and your personal history, they want to know about the money that you're using to fund this manufacturer or importer of cigars. So you have to describe, do you have a bank account? What's the name of the bank account? Who are the signatory authorities on that bank account? How did you get the money that was put into that bank account? Who are your investors? They could be silent investors, they could be active investors, they could be other officers or shareholders of the company. Whatever it is, you just need to disclose it to the government. So that's what that's all about. And oftentimes you'll have to attach documentation such as a monthly bank statement. Okay, so here's the area where you would provide additional document information. And of course, somebody has to certify it. Someone who's the applicant, the representative for the company, usually the president or CEO or managing member, will be the applicant. And they're the ones who's certifying that everything in the application is true. Okay. All right, so that's about the individuals. This application for permit to import tobacco products or processed tobacco is about the company. So you're applying for under one, importer of tobacco products or importer of processed tobacco. And then this could be your initial permit or your renewal of your permit. And number two, your legal name, the trade name of the company, and other identifying information for the application of the company and the individual who's the most responsible person at the company. So that's what all of this A through I is. Dollar amount of investment in my business, that's all information that you put in. It can be whether it's $1,000 or $500,000. Just mention it to the TTB official and be ready to be questioned. Normally, these get processed electronically through TTB and within anywhere from 30 to 90 days. So usually, at least I've done it so often, once we submit it, we get an acknowledgement number, and I talk to the analyst in Cincinnati. It's reviewed, approved, goes to a supervisor, reviewed and approved, goes to the assistant administrator, and then you get your permit. So that could be anywhere from 30 to 90 days. So I hope that you will all be very successful. All right, so let's look at this permits online. I mentioned this earlier before. Everything I showed you before is paper. It used to be, like I said, I've been doing this for 30 years. Everything was only by paper. Now I only do it online. You can legally still submit it by paper, but that just means someone at TTB at the Revenue Center in Cincinnati has to scan the documentation into the system, which just delays the processing of your applications. So it really makes no sense to do it on paper. You might as well do everything online. It's so much easier and faster, and TTB really wants it that way. So there's an application process to be an applicant online for a submitter, someone like me at Gunster. So I've done this and I have my own user account, password, and then just add different clients. So it's much easier for me to upload information online. That is everything from your personnel questionnaire to your corporate documentation. And this is what the home screen looks like. You don't have to do it all at once. If you do one part of your application, you can save it and come back to it later and then update it. So again, online is the way to go. All right, moving on. So you got your permit. You're now an authorized importer or manufacturer of tobacco products, cigars, and you want to either sell from the manufacturer or import into the United States your first shipment of cigars. You've got hopefully a customs broker, and I think there are several customs brokers who are participating in this webinar. Most people, importers, have never seen what a customs form 7501 looks like. So this is what it looks like. This is your entry summary. This again is the paper version of what the electronic version looks like online when the customs broker files an entry with U.S. Customs Border Protection for you, the U.S. cigar importer. So there's an entry number here in line number 1. Entry type, mostly consumption. There'll be a country of origin, whether it's the Dominican Republic, or whatever country the merchandise is coming from. The exporting country is number 14. There's an importer number. That's your tax identification number. And the importer of record here, that's the U.S. importer. Last, first, middle initial, and the address. Importantly, the HTSUS, that's the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States of your cigars. The weight of your cigars, the quantity of your cigars. Look at 32, the value of the cigars. This is critical. And then 34, the duty and the IR tax, internal revenue tax. If any of that information in this form is incorrect, it's potentially subject to the importer and its owner or officer to criminal prosecution, or at least a commercial fraud penalty from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. We want to make sure all of this information is correct. The broker will rely upon the import company for the commercial invoice and the packing list to make sure the information is correct. And they take that information from the commercial invoice, the packing list, the bill of lading, and input that information into the electronic CBP form 7501, submit it electronically to customs. Hopefully within either at that time or soon thereafter, they pay the excise tax and any customs duties. The entry is cleared. The cigars go to the whatever warehouse, eventually to the retailer, and that's the way it works. So again, depending on how many line items there are, it's always the tariff number, the value, rate of duty, and of course, the internal revenue tax that's paid to CBP. Okay, here's a screenshot. This is directly from the TTB website. It may be that after you've been approved as an importer or manufacturer, your ownership changes. Maybe somebody bought the company stays the same, the tax identification stays the same, but the owners are different. Or maybe an officer has changed. The CEO was there, or the managing member of the company has been changed. You are required within 30 days to notify TTB of those changes. And a lot of people don't realize that. If you move locations, again, you're supposed to notify TTB of the change of your location. So this is just a reminder, add or remove the trade name. Maybe your trade name has changed. And again, change in control. The stock ownership has changed. So you have to notify TTB. Even if you terminate your business, look at the last section. Termination of business. If you go out of business, you're supposed to notify the TTB. So please do so. Okay. We talked a lot about, I say tobacco products, and I'm really focusing on cigars. There are a lot of definitions in the TTB regulations which are not well understood, I think, by the industry as much as it should be. And I think people get tripped up later on. So I just included the most basic definitions here of even what a cigar is, right? Probably never read the definition by TTB of what a cigar is. Any roll of tobacco wrapped in leaf tobacco or in any substance containing tobacco other than any rolled tobacco. So that's what a cigar is to the TTB. So sometimes people think they're importing a product that's not a cigar, and we have to go back to whether or not it is under the definition. And then who's an export warehouse? A lot of times there's merchandise that comes into the United States, let's say from the DR, comes into Miami or Tampa or Houston, New York, LA, not for consumption in the United States. It's merely passing in transit through the United States. Maybe it's going to go on a cruise ship. Maybe it's passing through the Dominican Republic, through Miami, and its way to China. Or maybe it's going from Miami to LA and then from LA to China. Either way, it's not for sale in the United States. So someone has an export warehouse and there's no internal revenue tax to be paid, no customs duties to be paid. There's a declaration, customs has to know what's coming in and out of the United States, but there's a way to export it without paying any duties. What's an importer? Who's an importer? What is a large cigar? You probably all know this. Cigars weighing more than 3,000 pounds per thousand. More than 3 pounds per thousand, sorry. Who is a manufacturer of tobacco products? This is the definition. It's not, if you're not here, then you're not a manufacturer. This is the most critical part, if you remember nothing else. Sale price. Remember this excise tax is on the first sale price? The definition is the price for which large cigars are sold by the importer or United States manufacturer, determined in accordance with a certain regulation. That's it. And the definition of small cigars. We're going to come back over and over to these definitions because they all become really important later on. All right, here's a screenshot of the CFR, the Code of Title 27, Code of Federal Regulations, 41.31, cigar tax rates. You're probably all familiar with this. Okay, here it is. Here's the federal regulation of TTB. So everything 41, the title, Chapter 41 is TTB regulations. Large cigars based on the sale price for which large cigars are sold by the importer. So this is what's different, and every broker should be very carefully listening to this. In a typical transaction not involving tobacco products, not involving cigars, the import price, in other words, what the foreign exporter sells to the US importer, that's the normal price at which determined the duty rate. In cigars, it's not that. It's after the merchandise has arrived in the United States in the first sale in the United States from the importer to that's usually a distributor or a retailer. That's the price at which TTB determines the excise taxes to be paid. So sometimes there are schemes, as the TTB would say, or smart planning on how to figure out what the first sale price is on imported cigars to lower the price. Of course, it's favorable to pay less excise taxes. The higher the first sale price, the more excise taxes you pay. So there are ways to reduce legitimately that price. So I want to make sure that's okay. So it just basically says U.S. Customs and Border Protection is the one that actually collects the payments of the excise tax by the U.S. importer for the payment. And it says here, accounted for deposit as internal revenue tax collections by the Port Director of Customs according to its customs procedures. A lot of people don't know it's actually U.S. Customs that collects the money on behalf of TTB, even though it's TTB's regulations. Okay. Separate from the individual entry and payment of internal revenue taxes to U.S. Customs, there's a monthly report. This is, again, a paper version of the report, which should be done online by either your customs broker or preferably your own company as the U.S. importer. And this has to be filed accurately, monthly, whether it's small cigarettes, large cigarettes, small cigars, large cigars, snuff, chewing tobacco, pipe tobacco, roll your own tobacco, and processed tobacco. All of those, TTB wants to know what's in your warehouse, what passed through your warehouse, what was destroyed in your warehouse, or exported or sold. They want to track everything to make sure your documentation here matches the import records and the export records, if any. That's how they catch you, because they usually find a discrepancy between this monthly report and your import reports. Okay, here it is again. All of this. If you have lost, if you have destroyed cigars, you need to notify the TTB. Okay, I'm going to focus on this once again. This is the actual regulation. We talked about keeping records from the very beginning through when you end up terminating your business. All records required to be kept, including copies, schedules, authorizations, releases, reports, returns, shall be retained. This is the period of time now for 3 years following the close of the year in which the report is filed or made. 3 years from the date the report is made. So I tell people, why not keep it for 5 years? There's no reason to destroy electronic records anyway. And if you keep hard copy records, that's fine, but keep them for at least 3 years from the date they were made. And of course, if you are under investigation or under an audit, you have to keep those records, even if it's beyond the 3-year time period. Such records shall be made available for inspection by any appropriate TTB officer upon request. Typically, the TTB officer will contact you via phone or email and ask for the records. Once you verify it's really a TTB officer, you should be able to provide them in a reasonable amount of time. It doesn't mean the same day, it might be the next day or the next week. If a TTB officer shows up at your office, you're supposed to, again, make the documentation available to the TTB officer. Doesn't necessarily mean at that moment, it might be the next day. Maybe you need to contact your attorney or someone else to ask questions before providing those records to the officer. The officer may ask you for the records and say, you're not the subject of the investigation, it's about somebody else. That's not necessarily true. The officer requesting the records is not obligated to tell you why they need the records, or to be honest with you, why they need the records. Okay, we talked a little bit earlier about the Tax Audit Division. This is their mission, of course, the proper payment of federal excise taxes. That's all what they're about. They're not looking to harm the company. They just want to make sure the proper amount of taxes has been paid by the importer. And it turns out when they do an audit, most of the time, their proper amount of taxes is not paid. Doesn't mean there's any criminal activity. Doesn't mean there was any intentional fault on behalf of the importer. It just happens. When you're importing millions and millions of sticks, sometimes there's a mistake that gets made. And the TTB auditors are fantastic about finding those mistakes. And as long as you're upfront with the TTB auditors, my experience has been that they will be cooperative with you. Okay, this is the Tax Audit Division, how it's organized. You have a deputy director up in Washington. You have different centers around the country. The audit director Eastern is usually Eastern United States, and of course they've got the Western United States. Depending upon where the auditee, meaning the import company, is located, will determine which audit director you get selected by. Okay. Okay, so this is the audit process, and this is directly from the TTB website. They do a risk analysis. They determine whether or not your company is risky, whether you have proper internal controls or not. If you don't have written procedures and policies of how you declare your cigars to TTB through US Customs, it's a concern. So they do an audit schedule. That's when they call you and they schedule when they're going to visit with you. They visit with you. The field work is after they've retained the documents from you, and then they issue a report. They'll send you a draft report. You can comment on it. They will issue then a final report. Usually there are findings. Findings are negative findings where TTB is disclosed or determined that you have failed to have proper internal controls. You failed to file the full amount of excise taxes that are owed, and you owe X amount of dollars. That's the way it works. It can take several months for an audit to be completed. So this is how it really happens, and this happens every day all over the country. I've been from California to New York to, of course, Florida many times in these situations. You have an opening conference, used to be over by video the last couple of years, but now it's in person again with the TTB auditor. And sometimes it's one person, sometimes it's two auditors. They want to see through your facility, as I said. They want the people who are really knowledgeable about the cigar business in the room with them. They don't want the clerk and the secretary. They want the president and the import manager or the compliance manager there, or counsel or whoever. They're going to review the records. They're going to test a few transactions, which means they're going to give you a list of entry numbers. And they want to trace where you purchased cigars from, how you declared them to U.S. Customs, how they were transported into the warehouse, and what is the inventory control system in the warehouse to the point when they departed the warehouse and were delivered to the distributor or retailer or the next buyer. And then they'll evaluate your internal controls and they'll issue their findings. That whole process I just mentioned in 1 minute could take them 2 to 6 months, depending on how large your operation is. Okay, moving on. It may be, if you're in this business long enough, there's something that goes wrong with your cigars. Maybe your warehouse had a leak. Here in Florida, we have hurricanes. So no matter how secure a warehouse is, you get 150-mile-per-hour winds, you're going to lose some cigars. So there is a process by which an importer can file with TTB a request to be reimbursed for any excise taxes paid on those cigars which were destroyed or lost. And there's a specific process to do so. And TTB is very good about refunding any monies paid, not with interest, but they will fund the monies. So this is the regulation about how to request a refund of those products destroyed by fire, casualty, or act of God while in the possession or ownership of such taxpayer. Okay, and it gives you the regulations, but we're going to look at the actual forms in a moment. Here's another one, reduction of tobacco products. So here we have, with tobacco products or cigarette papers have been imported to the United States, are withdrawn from the market, the taxpayer desires to file a claim, he shall assemble the articles in any suitable place if they are to be destroyed or reduced to tobacco. So what that means is TTB, not only after you submit your claim, they'll actually come out to your facility to verify that the merchandise is there, and they'll actually escort the tobacco products, cigars, to the burn site or the dump and watch them burn or be dumped to verify that that all occurred. So here is the actual, one of the forms that you will need to submit to TTB, and we do this all for you, of course, and we do it online because TTB loves it online. This is the schedule of tobacco products, cigarette papers, or tubes withdrawn from the market. In other words, destroyed or lost. And you have to look at the kind of articles, so cigars, small, large, the number, the sales price, total number of pounds or ounces, total sales price, the rate of the tax, and then the amount of the tax that you paid. So someone has to sign this on behalf of the importer. And again, we submit that to TTB online. Here's a sample. I whited out most of this basic information, but I gave you an example of what it looks like. In this case, it was small cigars, 2.6 million sticks, valued $131,000. And here it is. This is the amount that we were withdrawn from the market. We're looking for a refund of the tax. This is the final action in the claim for TTB taxes, second form, signed and dated, in this case, by the TTB official. Here's the actual claim form that we submit. These are to be crushed or landfill destruction of damaged product. This is a certificate of destruction, the standard language I put in here. And again, signed, dated by the applicant client. Here's a certificate of the disposal. In South Florida, we do most of our destruction at the dump and operated by Waste Management. And that's how you get all your money. The money will be sent by, if you give them a wire information, they'll wire it into your account. Otherwise, they'll send you a paper check from the Treasury Department, payable to your import company. And you are very happy to receive that full refund of destroyed or withdrawn cigars from TTB. So that's it. That's the questions. As far as this, let's see, Kim, did you see? All right, so the chat box has been very quiet, but that's okay. I don't know if there's a way, Josh, that we can open this up for Q&A now by video or sound, if people can be, I don't know if you can, how you want to do this, or they can submit questions now in the chat room.
Yeah,
we're now at 2:47, so it's good timing.
absolutely. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to go ahead or submit it in the chat box, and we can unmute you. While you think of your question, again, I would like to emphasize that we will be, Peter will be on hand to answer questions at the PCA trade show. Another thing that I want to alert folks that are attending the show next week, on July 10th in room 301 at the Sands Expo, we are going to host an international roundtable on global cigar scene insights. We are at PCA, we're starting to look a lot broader about international issues, about commerce issues, about trade issues, and the connection with the domestic side. For those of you that witnessed, the release, the press release that was sent out last week, we filed a comment with European Union supporting the European Cigar Manufacturers Association. That was the first time that we did something like that. And we're looking at things, not only locally, but globally, and offering more thought leadership, best practices. So Peter was kind enough to, kick this series off with us. And, we'll have the session and roundtable next week at the trade show. Following that, our intention, again, to have content and best practices for all membership types, retailers, importers, exporters, and manufacturers. We are going to be doing a session that, really applies to everybody later in July on trademark and trade dress. So our government affairs team has been working with experts in drafting some guidance for our membership on this topic, and we're going to offer some best practices on that. So, these hot topic series will continue, needless to say. Does anybody have any questions for Peter that they would like to ask in front of the group? I'm looking through the chat box, or we can unmute you.
Well, I'm looking at next, when I go out there to Vegas with you, Josh, I'm hoping to not only enjoy a few cigars, but I probably need to buy another humidor. So I'm hoping there's a selection out there of exhibitors of humidors.
There you go. It's going to be a fantastic time.
Yeah, excited. All right, good. So if people don't have questions, they can always, my email address was up earlier. You can contact Josh for any general questions, I guess, about the event. And I'll be there July 8th is when I arrive. So I'm excited.
Sounds great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll hopefully see you all next week. And if you have a hot topic that you'd like us to discuss in webinar format and seek out experts like Peter, please let us know. Just email joshua@premiumcigars.org and we will find a expert and put together a session. My hope is that we do these monthly about, everything from lobbying and policy issues to more the intricacies and nuts and bolts of being in the cigar business, like, what you saw today. Peter, thank you again for your insights, and we will see you soon in Las Vegas.
Sounds good. See you soon. Thanks, everybody.